Hello, welcome to this month's episode of the Visa Hour. Today, we will be discussing non-immigrant visas to the United States, which are for people who want to travel to the United States to temporarily visit. My name is Mimi. I'm a vice consul here at the embassy. I'm from the state of Pennsylvania, home of the Philadelphia Phillies, which is where this t-shirt is from. This is Jenny.
Hi, I'm Jenny. I'm from the state of Michigan, where my alma mater, Michigan State University, is located. Later in the program, Mimi and I will talk a little bit more about our hometowns.
You can send us questions for the Visa Hour today about visiting the United States, and we'll answer them live on the show. In order to send us a question, post the question on Twitter using the hashtag #TheVisaHour. You can also post it on the U.S. Embassy Facebook page or on our Google Plus page. Speaking of contacting us, we wanted to make sure that you followed the U.S. Embassy Twitter account at twitter.com/US Embassy Manila. You should also like our Facebook page at facebook.com/manila.usembassy and visit our Google Plus page at gplus.to/US Embassy Manila.
Before we start with questions, we want to make sure that you know about other resources for learning more about visas. First, you can check out the Visa Wall on our Facebook page. On the Visa Wall, you can find lots of useful information on all different types of visas. Also, you can check out our visa blog called The Satisfied Voyager. That's visa and satisfied as one word at blogs.usembassy.gov/Philippines. If we're unable to get your question answered today, you can always send us an email at consmanilaniv@state.gov for non-immigrant visa questions, ivmanila_replies@state.gov for immigrant visa questions, or acsinfomanila@state.gov for American Citizen Services. And you can always find useful information on our website at manila.usembassy.gov.
Okay, and now on to our first question. Today, in addition to answering questions that have been submitted by you guys online, Jenny and I will be discussing common myths and misconceptions about the non-immigrant visa process and things that we've heard about applying for a U.S. visa that are simply untrue.
Here, I have one. Lots of people tell me that you shouldn't tell the officer if you have relatives in the U.S.
That's not true. You should always be honest with the visa officer when you're interviewing for your visa. If you have relatives in the United States, you shouldn't try to hide them. If the officer asks you about them, you should be honest. When you lie, frequently the visa officer can tell that you're not telling the truth, and it hurts your credibility. The officer may think, well, if he has a sister in the United States, but he's telling me he doesn't, maybe he's also lying about where he's going, or how long he's going for, or how long he'll be staying in the United States. So the bottom line is, in your visa interview, you should always be honest. Here's a common question that we always get. When people apply for their tourist visas to the United States, they try to submit an affidavit of support. Is it true that you need an affidavit of support for your non-immigrant visa application?
Maybe that's not true.
Not true?
In fact, for non-immigrant visas, you don't need an affidavit of support. Just remember that for other visas like immigrant visas, there are certain requirements you can find on our website. But for a non-immigrant visa interview, you don't need an affidavit of support. You will be interviewed based on your social, family, and especially economic ties. Really, the economic ties of your friends and family are not what we're talking about during your interview. So you should bring all documents with you in case the officer wants to review them, but you don't necessarily need an affidavit of support.
But what if I'm applying for a student visa? Will the visa officer ask me to show proof that I can pay for my studies?
That's a good point, Mimi. For some categories, like student visas, you do need to be able to prove to the officer that you can afford the tuition.
We have our first question from Angel G. that was submitted via Twitter. It says, can I exchange my expired green card to a non-immigrant visa?
Thanks for the question, Angel. Yes, it's not actually an exchange. Every applicant still needs to be interviewed, whether or not you were a former green card holder. If you come to the embassy and you still hold a valid green card or permanent resident card, and you haven't yet abandoned it, and you'd rather do that and become a non-immigrant for a tourist visa, the officer will direct you to the Department of Homeland Security, or USCIS, which are housed in our consulate. There you can abandon your status if you would like to, if you decide to do that, and then you can return to apply for a non-immigrant. But however, just because you were once a green card holder or a permanent resident in the U.S. doesn't mean you automatically qualify for a tourist visa. You'll still have to go through the interview process.
And how do people get to USCIS?
They have a website called uscis.gov, and they're also here at our embassy, and you can find information on our website. Our next question is from Jojo Sadul, coming from Twitter. Jojo asks, I applied for my mom online, and she paid the fee already. How do we schedule and interview?
Okay, so if she already paid the fee, you can pay the visa fee at any BPI branch. Once she gets the receipt from paying the visa fee, she can call our embassy call center to schedule an interview, or she can schedule a visa interview online. The links and the phone number for the call center and the online appointment schedule website are on our website at manila.usembassy.gov.
So I've got another myth. A lot of people say that if you're young and single, there's no way you're going to get a visa. Is that true?
That's not true at all. Having personally interviewed thousands of visa applicants, I've issued lots of young single people visas. The key is to qualify for a tourist or non-immigrant visa to the United States. You need to demonstrate that you're truly a non-immigrant, that you're not intending to go live or work in the United States, unless, of course, you're applying for a working visa. So every applicant is judged individually based on their own situation. The consular officer must be convinced In fact, sometimes consular officers will look at if you're married and you have family here as a tie to the Philippines. But it's also possible that you can have lots of other ties to the Philippines even if you're not married and do not have children or family here. Mm-hmm. We have another question from Martin Alito that was submitted via Twitter. His question says, how long would it take to get a renewal on the non-immigrant visa?
Thanks for your question, Martin. So we don't actually have a renewal process. There could be a couple different things you're talking about. If you've previously had a tourist visa but it's expired more than 12 months ago, you go through the normal interview process. If you've had a visa in the past and you've used it well, this is certainly in your favor. But you'll still go through the normal interview, and the officer will try to determine if you have strong ties outside of the U.S. If you do, and you're qualified for the visa, you'll receive your visa. That process usually takes about 3 to 5 business days for delivery. However, maybe you're talking about the visa renewal process, or VRP. For those applicants, there is actually a set of requirements listed on our website that you can see, and if you meet all of those requirements, your interview is waived. If you have additional questions about VRP, you can email us or check out our website for all of the requirements.
And our website is manila.usembassy.gov, and if you have a question about non-immigrant visas, it's consmanilaniv@state.gov. C-O-N-S Manila NIV, all one word, at state.gov.
So we have another question from Facebook from Ephraim Ramos. He asks, what will happen to my 10-year multiple entry visa if I was given another visa, which is J1 for an exchange visitor?
As long as your B1, B2, or your tourist visa to the United States was not canceled at the time that you apply for a J1 visa, your tourist visa is still valid. Typically, we issue 10-year multiple entry visas. You're allowed to hold different categories of non-immigrant visas at the same time. So you can have a J1 visa or a B1, B2 at the same time, a B1, B2, a tourist visa, and an F1 student visa at the same time. The only exceptions to this rule are if you're issued an immigrant visa, we have to cancel your tourist visa since you're intending to move to the United States. Also, for certain categories of work visas, for the H-1B specialty occupation visa and for the L-1 intercompany transfer visa, we will cancel your tourist visa when we issue you the H-1B or the L visa because you're moving to the United States with your family in most of those cases. So it's hard to say that you're going to be going for vacation. But you can have multiple visas in different categories at one time. We have one more question from Facebook from Eden Remo Reyes. Thanks, Eden, for your question. She says, I got an indefinite and multiple visa last 1989. Unluckily, it was recalled after a few months. I did not have a chance to surrender it. Can I apply again?
Thanks for your question, Eden. I think what I'm understanding is that you received a visa in 1989, and then maybe you came in again, and that time you were denied or did not receive another visa. So at any time, Eden, you can reapply for a visa following the steps that Mimi mentioned earlier. And if you forgot those steps, you can find them on our website. People are free to reapply at any time. But however, we recommend that you really read the information on U.S. immigration law that we give you at the time of the interview. And once you feel that you're qualified, meaning that you can demonstrate that you have strong social, family, and economic ties outside of the U.S., that you're free to reapply again.
Also, for indefinite visas that we issued back in the 1980s, unfortunately those are no longer valid. So if you got one back in 1985 and haven't traveled to the United States in the past 10 or 20 years, you'll have to apply again for a visa, unfortunately. We no longer issue visas with no expiration date.
Our next question is from Mona Lisa Sumilang Panganiban. Mona Lisa asks, I applied for a job in the U.S. and luckily found an employer, but they told me that the U.S. Embassy in the Philippines had already met the quota for releasing working visas by June 2012 for the year 2013. When can I wait for the next Applicants aren't pre-screened. Every applicant is treated fairly. As soon as they arrive at the interviewing window, the consular officer has a look at the information that you submitted on your application and then asks you a series of questions in your interview. Based on that, we use the law to determine whether or not you're qualified for a visa at that time.
And I'd like to remind everyone that the visa officers conduct hundreds of interviews a day and thousands of interviews over the course of their time here. So your interview may feel short to you, but the visa officers are very skilled at interviewing and have been experienced in doing this. So they will make a fair decision. We have another question from Winia Alidin Tolentino. Winia asks, what are the possibilities of applying for a student visa? What are the requirements? Jenny, you want to answer this?
So we have a student visa, and all the information is on our website because there are many requirements. But maybe Mimi wants to take us into the details.
So to apply for a student visa, first you have to apply to a school in the United States and get in. Unfortunately, if you say, I want to study in the United States, the embassy can't really help you until you have a plan for studying in the United States. You have to apply to a school on your own. You have to get into the school. Once you get into the school will issue you some forms that you should be bringing to your visa interview. And you'll still have to pay the application fee, fill out the visa application, bring in the forms. You'll have to pay the appropriate fees, and then demonstrate to the visa officer that you are a true student and that you've really thought about what you're studying. You have to be able to talk about why you picked this program. A lot of times people apply for visas and they can't really explain why they picked this program. They really just, they're sisters in the United States and they said, and now I'm going. Because the F visa or student visa is still a non-immigrant visa, you still have to overcome the presumption of immigrant intent. The easiest way to do this is to see whether or not you're a credible student. I'll ask the visa applicants, okay, so why do you want to study this? Did you apply to any other schools? Why did you pick this school over other schools? And the program has to make sense a little bit to the visa officer. We have to be convinced that you're really a true student who wants to go and that you will eventually try to return to the Philippines. So unfortunately, a lot of times people come to me and say, I want to study in the United States, and I would love to be able to help you out, but you have to apply to a school that has that's accredited by the Department of Homeland Security for issuing the forms for student visas before the embassy can really do anything to help you out in the situation.
That's a good point, Mimi. When you come for your student visa interview, it's not enough just to have the documents. It's better to be able to tell the officer what your past experiences were, what course you want to take, and what you want to do with that degree in the future.
I think that's true for tourist visa applications as well as student visa applications. A lot of times I get people who come to the interview and try to hand me a stack of documents this big. I could take that home and it would still take me 3 days to read through it. It's much faster sometimes to ask someone a few questions, and if you're able to talk about it easily with the visa officer, you'll have a better chance of convincing the visa officer of your true intent to go to the United States. We know that people are nervous, and we encourage you not to be nervous. I know that's easy to say, but if you're able to talk freely about it, it's better than having a lot of supporting documents that you give to the visa officer to read.
So our next question is from Edwin B. Guinto from Twitter. He asks, what happens if the petitioner dies and the petition is current? Can you still appeal?
Okay, I think this question deals with immigrant visas, and so I can talk about this briefly. If you have a question about your specific case where your petitioner has died, I would advise you to email the immigrant visa unit at ivmanilareplies@state.gov with your name, your date of birth, and your case number. The case number usually starts with MNL, and then there's a long string of numbers. Typically, though, when the petitioner dies, the visa petition is automatically revoked by USCIS. There are certain cases, though, where the petition can be reinstated and you can still go to the United States. However, you should contact the immigrant visa unit about your concerns specifically, and they'll be able to provide you with more information.
I've got another one. Lots of people ask on the blog, and they think that it's okay to work in the U.S. on a tourist visa, on a B1, B2 visa.
Unfortunately, that's a very common misconception, but it's not true. If you enter the United States on a B1, B2 visa, the tourist visa, you are not authorized to work in the United States. Working, we will define as performing some sort of work, helping out, even if it's just at your aunt's business, if you get money in the United States. The tourist visa is intended for a short, temporary visit. If you need to be working in the United States, if you need to make money to pay for your visit, that's not really going for vacation. So even though there's no criminal penalties you don't go to jail or anything if you work. However, if you work on the tourist visa, if the visa officer at your next visa interview discovers it, or if the next time you go to the United States, the immigration will likely ask you about it, your visa may be invalid. And it's very unlikely that you'll get another visa because the tourist visa is not intended for you to work in the United States. So when you're using it to work in the United States, you're not using it correctly.
And there are some non-immigrant visa categories where you can work legally in the U.S. for temporary periods of time, such as the H-1B, like we mentioned earlier, the H-2B, the L. So if you're interested in actually working in the U.S. legally, there are many resources on our website that indicate which type of visa category it is, but it's definitely not the B1, B2.
Okay, and a question from the embassy Facebook page says, what is the visa reissuance program?
So the Visa Reissuance Program, or VRP, is a program that allows applicants who meet a certain set of requirements. So I'll mention a few of them now. You must have been issued a visa in Manila that has expired within the last 12 months, have no overstays or extensions, and have not been refused a visa between that issuance and now. There's a whole other list of other requirements, and those are listed actually on the website and are listed as a part of the application process. So while you're applying, there's a certain questions that you can answer, and if you answer them, if your answers to them match, then you are qualified for the VRP program. For those applicants, they still have to appear at the embassy in order to be fingerprinted, but they don't actually, their interview is waived. However, you have to remember that no matter what, we always reserve the right to interview any applicant for any reason. And so just because you're a VRP, number one, doesn't mean that you won't be interviewed. Some applicants will still be interviewed. And number two, doesn't mean that it's an automatic reissuance. We still are reviewing all the information you submitted on your application, and if there's a reason why you may or may not be qualified, you're called back in for an interview, and at that time we go through all of the requirements again. If at that point you're found to not be qualified, then you won't be issued a new visa.
And so my personal advice whenever I talk to people who ask about VRP who live outside of Manila is, if you're coming to the embassy anyway to be fingerprinted, to drop off your application, you might as well schedule an appointment for an interview. If you're flying from Davao, if you're flying anywhere, if it's anything that takes longer than 5 hours to get to Manila, you don't want to come into the embassy, be fingerprinted, and have to come back for an interview. Just because you're called back in for an interview doesn't mean you're not getting your visa. It just means that the consular officer has a few questions that they'd like to talk to you about. It's a great program for people who have a lot of visas or have had visas in the past and have limited time. But if you're traveling a long distance, I always tell my friends, you should just make an appointment for an interview. It's about an hour long that you're staying at the embassy, but you don't have to travel, and it can save a lot of hassle in the long run.
So our next question is from Jeanette A. Green. What's the main reason why applicants are not qualified for the visa?
For tourist visas to the United States, tourist visas are, applicants are required in order to get the visa to demonstrate non-immigrant intent. So unfortunately, the way that U.S. visa law is written, every applicant is presumed to be an intending immigrant to the United States unless they demonstrate, we always say, strong family, social, and economic ties outside the United States to overcome the presumption of immigrant intent. Well, what does that really mean? It means that when you come to the visa window, I, as the visa officer, have to assume that on this trip you're going to stay in the United States, work in the United States, that you're not really just going for a vacation or to visit your sister. And so I have to see what would make you come back to the Philippines. Most people are denied because they've failed to make a strong case for why they're coming back to the Philippines. You have to remember that you should be able to talk about your trip to the United States too, but when the officer is asking you questions about your job, you should be able to answer them truthfully and convincingly. You should know things about your job, be able to answer them. So the number one reason I think is that people have a hard time sometimes. They're nervous. They want to talk about their trip to the United States. They want to talk about their ties to the United States. They're visiting their sister, and that's all great. We know you have a sister in the United States, but we really need to know, why will you come back to the Philippines? People are nervous, and sometimes people, again, like we discussed earlier, they'll say, oh, I lied about having a sister there. Be truthful, be honest. Try not to be nervous. Mm-hmm. And we have one more question from Divine, submitted via Twitter. She says, my immigrant visa was not approved last year. Can I apply for a tourist visa now?
Sure, Divine. Now, I've never worked in the immigrant visa section like Mimi has, but when you're applying for a tourist visa, we take into account all sorts of things. So if you applied for an immigrant visa, we will see that, and we will ask you about that, and as long as you can explain it and still show us that you've got ties to the Philippines, like Mimi has mentioned, and that you do intend to come back, then you could be qualified for a tourist visa. However, if you were applying for an immigrant visa before, that is a signal to us that you were interested in immigrating, and so we will look at the reasons why you didn't. For example, if you didn't because there was a problem with your application, or like another person asked, maybe the petitioner died, that could lead us to one decision. However, some people have the immigrant petition open, but then decide that have taken a good job here in the Philippines, or get married here in the Philippines and have children and have really established a life here and have decided that they don't want to pursue a life in America. So again, it all comes down back to being able to show that you are really tied here to the Philippines and you intend to return.
That's a very good point. And it's likely that the consular officer who interviews you will ask you questions about why your immigrant visa was denied. Mm-hmm. If it's because you decided, perhaps you were applying for a spouse visa because your American citizen spouse lives here, and now you're not moving back to the United States, that's a perfectly fine reason. Now you just want to go visit his family, things like that. Or if there's another reason, if you had some sort of, there's lots of reasons why immigrant visas are not approved. they're usually put in a sort of pending status that we're waiting for you to submit more documentation. Very rarely are there hard and fast refusals. The consular officer will ask you about that, but you still have to demonstrate non-immigrant intent.
Exactly. And so it's not an automatic refusal, of course, if you have an open or a past immigrant application. But the most important thing is just to be honest about it, because the officer is going to want to know what happened. And so just be truthful.
And we'd like to remind you that you can watch this video later on YouTube at youtube.com/US Embassy Manila. Please, go ahead.
And don't forget to follow us on Twitter at twitter.com/US Embassy Manila.
And also like us on Facebook, facebook.com/manila.usembassy.gov.
And like I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of really good information on our blog called The Satisfied Voyager. Many of the questions we're addressing here today came directly from our blog.
If you have specific questions about your specific case for an immigrant visa application or your non-immigrant visa application, we can't talk about your specific case here because of privacy concerns, but you can email for non-immigrant visas, consmanilaniv@state.gov, and for immigrant visa inquiries, ivmanila-replies@state.gov.
We have another question in. Is there a minimum balance requirement that I must have in my bank account to assure my visa will be granted?
No. If you are applying for a tourist visa, we'd like to see that you can afford to pay for the trip to the United States. Say you're going on vacation to Disneyland for 2 weeks. We'd like to see, we ask you questions about your job, what your source of income is in the United States. We don't necessarily have to see bank statements. You can bring them along if you think it'll support your case. However, if you've borrowed a lot of money to pay for this vacation, and we look at your bank statement and you had nothing there before, and now suddenly last week you have a very high bank balance, that's something the consular officer is going to consider when he evaluates why you're going to the United States. Now, we understand that there are a lot of people who want to travel to the United States who don't necessarily have high bank balances and who don't make a ton of money, and that doesn't mean that you won't get a visa. Remember that every visa application is unique and that you just have to demonstrate strong family, social, and economic ties to the Philippines. So it has to be a combination of everything. Just having the money doesn't necessarily mean you'll be able to go.
What about this one? I've heard people say that there are quotas, that you should really apply early in the year or early in the day if you want to have any chance at getting a visa.
That's not true, especially not for tourist visas. I think that the myth comes from the numerical limitations on certain categories of immigrant visas, and like we mentioned earlier, for certain categories of working visas, only a certain number of petitions are approved every year. For the tourist visa, though, there's no numerical limit on the number of visas we issue either per day or per year. Coming in earlier is not going to make your application any easier. We want to encourage tourism to the United States. We love when Filipinos travel to the United States and see all of the different places that you can go. So there's no quota on the number of visas that we issue every day. So if you can't come in until 11 a.m., schedule your appointment for 11 a.m. I hate getting up early. I would schedule my appointment for as late as possible. But there's no advantage in applying earlier in the day or earlier in the year.
So another question from John Bloss. My fiance just received her letter with her Manila case number, and she was told that the next step is to pay BPI for the visa. Then the next thing is the medical checkup. Are there any more papers that I need to fill out?
So this is actually, I think you're referring to a K-1 visa application, the fiancé visa. The K-1 visa is technically a non-immigrant visa, but we actually do all the interviewing for them on the immigrant visa side, because immigrant visas are visas that as soon as you travel to the United States on them, you become a legal permanent resident or a green card holder. For fiancé visas, you don't become a legal permanent resident until you get to the United States, marry your fiancé, and then file some paperwork there. So for K-1 visas, you have to have an approved petition in the approved in the United States before you can be scheduled for an interview. There's actually a very, very good checklist on our website, manila.usembassy.gov, for K-1 visa petitions and applicants. Manila processes the largest number of fiancé visas of any visa issuing post in the world. So the information on there, I would really encourage you to check it out. Basically, though, to get an immigrant visa, you have to have an approved petition, you schedule an interview, you pay the fees, you can come in and pay the fees if you haven't already done that. In some cases, the fees are already collected in the United States. the immigrant visa applicant has to get a medical exam at St. Luke's Extension Clinic. The exam might take longer than 1 day for it to come through. So you should schedule that early. Once you have your medical clearance, then you can come in for your interview. Again, though, the easiest way to make sure you're covering all the steps is to go to manila.usembassy.gov, click on the visa side, immigrant visas, and there's a checklist for K-1 visas. One of the forms that you will have to fill out, though, if you are trying to bring your fiancé to the United States is an affidavit of support. But all of the information is on our website, and it's a lot easier to print it out and just sort of check off each of the boxes as you go along. So another common misconception that we have at the visa window is that you must present an invitation letter with your visa application to the United States.
That's a myth.
It's not true?
It's not true. It's not required to have an invitation letter for a non-immigrant visa. Lots of our applicants like to show us their invitation letters. But when you tell us that you have a sister that wants to visit you because she just had a baby, or that your mom wants you to come visit her in the U.S., or maybe your aunt who you haven't seen in 10 years would like you to come visit her in California, we usually believe that that's what you want to do. You should, of course, bring any supporting documents that you might think are going to be necessary, but we may not ask to see them during the interview. But for other types of visas, such as maybe your employer wants you to go for a training in the U.S. or wants you to go visit some clients or check out some equipment, for those types of visas, it's sometimes a good idea to bring a letter in case we have some specific questions and we want to check it out. But for an invitation letter, it's not really necessary.
Yeah, and the visa, again, like I said earlier, you should have all the documents with you, but the visa officer will ask you for any requirements that he or she wants to see. So if he wants to see bank statements, you can have them ready, but don't try to hand over a big stack because a lot of times it's easier to just talk about it. For example, if Jenny wants to go visit her sister in the United States, she should be able to talk about it rather than giving me a letter that has her sister's address and everything. It's also not required that you memorize the address of where you're living in the United States. I have friends that live in the United States. If I'm visiting them, I don't know their street address. A lot of people are trying to remember. They say 557 and the street number. Just the city and state is fine if we ask where you're going.
How about another one? A lot of people go on a J-1 visa, and some of them are subject to this 2-year rule. But from what I've heard other people say, that once you have the J-1 with the 2-year rule, you can't go back to the U.S. at all for another 2 years. Is that true?
That's not true. So J-1 visas are for exchange visitors to the United States, also sometimes for internships and traineeships in the United States. Depending on the type of program that you're going on and what you're going to do there, the consular officer, the visa officer, will determine when your visa is issued whether or not this thing called the 2-year rule applies. The reason that the 2-year rule basically means that after the end of your program, you have to come back to your country of residence, to the Philippines, for 2 years before you can be issued an immigrant visa or an H-1B working visa or an L working visa in the United States. And the idea behind that is that this is only for certain categories of J visas. It's when you're going to do research fellowships in the United States or you're going for trainings in the United States. And the program is set up so that people come to the United States, learn things, and then bring back their expertise to the country where they're originally from to apply it to try to improve the Philippines. So the 2-year rule only applies if you're going for an immigrant visa or an H-1B or L visa. If you can go on another J program, you can go on vacation, whatever you want to do. It's really if you're only moving to the United States, you have to come back to the Philippines for 2 years first. And you can get waivers for that if the 2-year rule applies and you haven't fulfilled the 2-year rule. Okay, so we have another question from Nico Augustine, submitted via Twitter. He says, I'm unemployed and my mom wants to go back to the U.S. next year. Is there any possibilities that I can get a visa?
Thanks for your question, Nico. So as we've covered today, that every person is interviewed as an individual, as long as they're an adult. For those children who are traveling with their parents, their application is based on whether or not their parents are qualified because they're a minor, and it's difficult for someone who's maybe 6 years old to show that they have ties to the Philippines. So for anyone who's over 18 who's an adult, they have to show on their own that they have strong social, family, and economic ties. Sometimes that's a hard thing to do for, let's say, a young student. But again, we take every person as an individual. So I can't tell you now whether or not you'd be qualified or unqualified just based on the fact that you're unemployed. We'd have to really have an interview and talk about your other situation, what family members you have here, what your other ties are to the Philippines. So if you want, you could maybe do a little research before you come in so that you don't maybe spend the money and come in when you know in advance that you're not qualified. But every person is reviewed based on their own merits.
And we'd like to emphasize that you're allowed to reapply again as many times as you want, as often as you want. If you're denied a non-immigrant visa, you can reapply this. You can go home and reapply the same day. However, when you come in and reapply, the consular officer can see the record of every time that you've applied before. So you really want to be thinking about, well, why was I denied? Do I understand the reasons that I was denied? And don't just keep, people come in and they say, I'm trying my luck. And I hate to see that because it's an expensive application. And you're just, if you haven't thought about the reason that you're denied or what you didn't show the consular officer, or maybe you were nervous and you weren't able to convince the consular officer of your true intent to come back to the Philippines. If you don't think about that before you just try your luck to reapply, you're really wasting your money. You really should think about your reasons for applying. Figure out if anything has changed. What's different this time around?
So another question from JJ Magalona says, hi, my grandparents will visit the U.S. early next year. Can they bring my daughter? My daughter doesn't have a visa.
Okay. So again, as Jenny mentioned earlier, I'm assuming that your daughter is a child under the age of 18. Typically for children under the age of 18, in order for them to be issued visas, we require that their parents also qualify for visas. Either their parents currently have tourist visas or their parents would qualify for the visa. We see a lot of grandparents who want to bring their grandkids to the United States, and it's really, really nice, but unfortunately we have to look at the children's ties are to their parents. If the grandparents have legally adopted the grandchild or have full legal custody of the grandchild, the grandparents traveling to the United States, the child can go too. But unfortunately, we have to assume that a child's ties are to their parents. So if you don't currently have a visa, the consular officer will evaluate whether or not you and your partner would likely qualify for a U.S. visa. But typically, we do require that children applying for a visa, their parents usually have to have visas or would qualify for visas. So if your visa's expired and you want to bring your kid or your child wants to go to the United States with grandparents, we'll consider that. But that's unfortunate.
Yeah, I think the best advice is that if you want your minor child to travel to the U.S. with another family member, that's fine. But when they come in for their interview, you should also interview for a visa. You should make the appointment together. If you are qualified at that time, then your child will also be qualified, and you can both receive visas. That doesn't mean that you have to travel with your child. If you then want your sister to take your child to the U.S., that's fine, as long as that you already have a visa.
And we know it's an expensive application, but it's a 10-year multiple entry visa. You can go as many times as you want. So really it works out to about less than $15 per year. It's the longest maximum validity visa. It's the longest validity visa that the U.S. issues for any nationality. So if your child wants to travel, best advice, as Jenny said, you should have a visa too. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we have another question from Lenny D. Dragon, who says, a relative of mine got denied a visa 30 years ago because she declared on her application that she was married and her husband, who had a pending immigration application, that time declared that he was single. And so she got denied a visa as a fraud case. They are now separated, not legally, for 29 years. She's retirement age and just wants to travel and enjoy life. Can she still get a U.S. tourist visa despite the case that happened 30 years ago? That wasn't even her fault. Okay, is there an appeal she could file? Okay, do you want to talk about
I'll start. So it depends. When she was found to have a fraudulent situation during her immigrant visa application, if she was given a permanent ineligibility, that's a different story. And for some of those cases, there's sometimes a possibility of overcoming that. Now, if there's no permanent ineligibility, then the officer might ask her what happened during that time. And because it was 30 years ago, if she can now show that she doesn't have a permanent ineligibility and she's now qualified for the visa, she has strong ties here, social, family, and economic, then there shouldn't be a problem in getting a tourist visa. However, if she has a permanent ineligibility, that's a different story.
So sometimes this is a good time to talk about this. People lie about a lot of things in visa interviews. Some of them aren't important, and we issue visas anyway. However, it is important to remind our visa applicants that if you lie during your visa interview or misrepresent something, if you say that this child is yours, it's not yours, that there sometimes results in a permanent ineligibility, that you are permanently not allowed to enter the United States. There are sometimes waivers for this ineligibility, and in the case that was just asked, one of the factors that's considered is the amount of time that's been passed since the ineligibility was first entered, whether or not you've tried to reapply. But it is important to remember that one of the reasons it's important to be honest and truthful in your visa interview is that if you're not honest, you can possibly be permanently barred from the United States, and we don't want that to happen.
So the next question is from Chidi Cortez Makatenge. She asked, my non-immigrant visa expired in June 2010, but before that, in 2005, it was damaged by a house fire. She informed the U.S. Embassy Manila at once and faxed all the pertinent documents, as they requested. She asked, renewing was not a priority then because of the situation, but now that she's married with a child and an up-and-coming wedding in the U.S. that we're hoping to witness, what does she need to do to prepare for her non-immigrant visa application?
Okay. So this happens a lot. People, 10-year visas, you don't travel for 5 years, your visa's expired. Basically, if you come in she'll need to come in and reapply for her visa and be interviewed by a consular officer. However, one of the factors that we consider is whether or not you've had a visa to the United States before and whether or not you've used it responsibly. For example, going for tourism, not working while you're in the United States. So she'll have to come in and make a new visa application and be interviewed. Present the case, the overcoming the presumption of immigrant intent, strong family and social economic ties. However, one of the factors that we do consider is past visa use. Another thing that this is very important to bring up is that if your visa is damaged or lost or stolen, you should report it to the embassy as damaged, lost, or stolen, especially if it's stolen, because if your visa is stolen, someone could use your identity to travel to the United States, and then it causes a lot of problems for you. It's illegal, lots of other things. So you should, in order to report a visa lost or stolen, we need to have an affidavit of loss. Okay. So you can email the non-immigrant visa unit at consmanila.niv@state.gov, and they can give you information about that. But if you have a damaged visa or passport, you should definitely report it. So we don't want people stealing your identity to travel to the United States. Okay, Archie Garcia via Twitter asks, he says, I'm the only one left here in the Philippines. I've been denied twice. Will it help if I promise a personal appearance before the consul?
So thanks for that question, Archie. I guess I'm not completely clear what you're asking, but it sounds like 2 times now you've come in to apply for a tourist visa and were denied. It also sounds like maybe your whole family has immigrated to America. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes we get someone at our window whose entire family has been petitioned, but for whatever reason, maybe you were too old or you got married, you didn't qualify for the petition at that time. So we understand, of course, your whole family is living in the U.S. and you want to go visit them, but you still have to be treated like every other candidate. So as you can probably imagine, to start, you may have a little bit of difficulty showing your family ties to the Philippines, especially with your whole immediate family residing in America. However, if you're married with children or have other extended family here, that can show some family ties. I'm not sure what your specifics of your case are, but as long as an applicant can still show that they have, let's say, a good job here, they've been working for many years with a good salary, and that they've got other family members here and other reasons to come back to the Philippines, that they don't want to go live permanently with their family in the U.S., they could still be issued.
And I think sometimes I see applicants who all of their siblings are in the United States, and they say, I had the opportunity to go and I wanted to stay here, and that's a really, really good sign. As for Archie's question about appearing before a consul, every visa applicant has to be interviewed before they're issued a visa, so regardless of whether or not to make a visa application, you have to be interviewed.
So our next question is from Ava Patricia Avila, who asks, can a tourist visa be used to travel to the U.S. while waiting for the approval of a pending fiancé visa?
Yes. If you already have a tourist visa to the United States, you can use it to travel to the United States while you're pending your fiancé visa. However, if you don't yet have a tourist visa to the United States and your fiancé in the United States is filing a fiancé petition for you, it can be very difficult to demonstrate to the consular officer that you are going for a short visit now, but maybe in 2 months you'll be moving there. So that's something that you should consider if you haven't already applied for your tourist visa. If you already have one and your fiancé is filing paperwork for a fiancé visa, feel free to travel to the United States. It should not be used as an immigrant visa. You shouldn't be using it to move there, but you can travel back and forth. Some people are worried about the wait times. We try to process fiancé visas as quickly as possible. Just last week, I was interviewing fiancés whose visa petitions had been filed, I think, 2 months before. So it's overall a very, very short wait time. So don't be worried about it. For certain categories of immigrant visas, it's a much longer wait time. But if you don't already have a tourist visa, you should wait for your fiancé visa. We have a question from Google Plus from Lee. Lee says, I'm a freelance tutor and I've been tutoring the kids of a family for 6 years. Could I present a letter from the parents as proof of employment?
Thanks for your question, Lee. This actually brings up a really good point. Often we ask applicants what their job is, and they say they don't have a job, meaning they're not working for, let's say, a company or the government, meaning that they maybe have a business or do some other type of work, such as freelance work. So feel freely, of course. You can bring in any documents you want, and if you're bringing a letter, it's possible the consular officer might want to see that. However, what we'd rather do is just talk to you, maybe ask you a couple questions about your work. So you should come prepared to talk about what you do as a tutor, to talk about how much money you earn, what types of subjects you tutor the children, that type of thing. Normally, you don't really need to prepare for that type of question, because if you're doing the work for 6 years, then you should be able to converse about it very freely. So again, you don't have to have a certain type of employment. Some people own businesses, some people work for the government, some people do freelance work, and all of them can be qualified as long as they're able to establish that that's a strong economic tie that's keeping them here in the Philippines.
And I think that brings up a really good point about when the visa officer asks, what's your job or what do you do for work? In the Philippines, we understand, we know that when you say it's trabajo means employment, and people think I have a business, that's not a real job. To the visa officer, it's what is your source of money and what do you do all day? So if you're tutoring and you get paid for it, that's a job to us. So you should answer with that. Okay, so we have another question from Honeylit de Millinois Foster. She said, I lost my passport with my 10-year B1 visa and I was not able to report it. Would it be difficult for me to apply for the tourist visa again?
So, like Mimi mentioned earlier, it's really important that as soon as you notice that your passport or your visa is lost, damaged, or stolen, to report it immediately to the embassy. But of course, sometimes that doesn't happen. So it's still important either before your interview or at the time of your interview to bring with you or send in advance an affidavit of loss to report it to the police, or to make a damage report. It's good that we have that on file. Like we said before, if it's lost, you don't want someone to try to travel with your identity to the U.S. because that can cause problems for you later too. So if you haven't already done so, send it now to the email address we mentioned earlier, or bring the affidavit of loss with you to your interview.
But it will not affect it shouldn't really affect your application for a tourist visa unless you sold it, which I'm assuming you haven't sold your visa.
So our next question is from Irene, and she asks, what visa type should a professional photographer apply for? And what are the chances that he or she can get it?
Okay, so it really depends on why you're traveling to the United States. I assume to take pictures. If someone in the United States is paying for you to take pictures, if you will be paid for work that you're doing in the United States, you need some sort of employment visa. So your employer, whoever's paying you in the United States, has to file the necessary paperwork for you. However, if you're being paid an honorarium and not really a salary or a commission, an honorarium is allowed under the B1 visa. If you're just traveling to the United States, you're a professional photographer, you just want to travel to take some pictures, you're not receiving any money at all, you can apply for a B1 or a B2 visa, the B1, B2 visa, and that's fine. I can't really speak to whether or not your chances of getting a visa are good. It depends on the type of visa that you're applying for, and again, your family, social, and economic ties here in the Philippines. But we do see that a lot. People, bloggers, things like that. It really depends on whether or not you're receiving money in the United States. If you're not, feel free to apply for a B1, B2 visa. If you are, you'll likely need some sort of employment-based visa unless it's just an honorarium that you're getting.
I mean, it brings up a good point. That's why the interview is so important, so that we can ask you these questions to make sure that you actually are applying for the right type of visa. Because just because we grant you a visa here, you still then have to get to the port of entry in the United States, and there the CBP or Customs and Border Patrol is going to review it again. So it's important that you tell us honestly what your plans are for the U.S. so that you have no problems entering the U.S. when you get there.
Right. So we have another, Imi Parcosa Marcelo says, my petition for the K-1 visa was approved and now I have all my papers with me complete. I'm going to the bank to pay the visa fee tomorrow. Do I need to apply a DS-160 form online after that? So this is a very good question. It's a very common question. The DS-160 is the online application form for non-immigrant visas. All non-immigrant visas except for the K-1 visa. So the K-1 visa is still a paper-based visa application. It's not online. So again, I will refer you back to our website with the very handy checklist, manila.usembassy.gov, and they can give you the information on the forms that you need to fill out. Once you've scheduled your appointment, you can come in, fill out the form, and they'll collect your documents and make sure that you have everything that you need. But the K-1 visa is unique in that it's technically a non-immigrant visa because you don't get a green card right when you go to the United States. But because it's a visa for immigration purposes, we actually process it with the immigrant visas, and the scheduling is done on the immigrant visa side. So no, you don't need the DS-160. The DS-160 is used only, it's also called the CEAC, C-E-A-C, and it's used for tourist visas, student visas, working visas, exchange visitor visas. And the link to the online application form to the DS-160 is also available on our website and also at ceac.state.gov. Okay, so another question that we get all the time is, you should wear a suit to your interview. Is this true? Do I have to wear a suit for my tourist visa interview?
That's false. You don't need to wear a suit to your interview. So you can see today that Mimi and I have dressed down a little bit for the visa hour, but normally we dress in our business clothes because we recognize that this is an important event for all of our applicants who are coming in to interview. However, for our applicants, we also understand that you spend some time waiting in the waiting room, and you have to get up early and sometimes travel far distances. So you should come to your interview dressed comfortably. You can choose to wear whatever you want. We don't judge you based on what you're wearing at the window. Like we've mentioned throughout the entire application, that whether you're wearing a sweatsuit or you're wearing a ball gown, as long as you can demonstrate your ties and you're a qualified applicant, you'll receive your visa.
I will say, though, that the waiting room can be a little bit cold, and so it's air conditioned, so bring a sweater. You also may be waiting outside for a little bit, and it can get quite hot in Manila. So bring some layers, but there's no dress code for your visa interview.
So this question's in from Twitter. Faith asks, my 10-year U.S. tourist visa just expired last December. How do I go about the renewal?
Okay, I think Faith is asking about the visa renewal process, the VRP. So assuming that you had a 10-year multiple entry visa and it expired within the past year, you go online, you still have to fill out the same application, pay the fee, and you come in, and you come in, you drop off your application, they do some pre-screening, and then your fingerprints are taken, and then you can go home for the day. And then the consular officer will issue your visa or decide that you need to come back in for an interview. So again, like I mentioned earlier, the VRP is a really great program for people who don't have a ton of time, who live close to Metro Manila. However, in some cases it may be easier if you live very far away, if you think that there may be a question or concern about your visa application, to just schedule an interview. And basically the steps for whether you schedule an interview or you apply via VRP are to fill out the application, the DS-160 online, pay the visa fee at any BPI location, and schedule an appointment. And when you schedule an appointment through the call center or on the appointment website, you'll be able to specify whether you want the full visa interview time or the VRP. Mm-hmm. The VRP advantage is usually that the waiting time is shorter. However, it's a 10-year multiple entry visa, so apply early. We always encourage everyone to apply early, and sometimes an interview is a better choice. Okay, we have a question from Twitter from Jenny Pearl. Jenny says that she is holding an expired U.S. C-1 visa. Is it easier for someone to get a tourist visa? She needs to see her sick father.
So a C-1 visa is used for transit. So sometimes we have applicants, let's say, who are flying into Canada, but their flight path takes them through the U.S. So maybe they have to stop over at the Detroit airport for a couple hours. The C-1 visa is also a non-immigrant visa, and so you go through the same interview process. If you previously had a C-1 visa, and when we have the interview, you show that you used that C-1 responsibly, like we talked about earlier. Maybe you just used it for transit, you never stayed there very long, you never worked illegally. Well, that works in your favor. That helps to show that you once held a visa and that you used it properly. However, it's not an automatic reason to give you a new visa. You still have to go through the same interview process because maybe your situation has changed since then.
And also, this is where it's really important that when you come to the visa interview, you're able to talk about your purpose of travel. The questions I ask if you're going on vacation, and that you're honest and truthful, the questions I ask about going on vacation are different if you're transiting. If you're transiting through the U.S., I'm usually not going to ask a lot of questions about how will you pay for your stay in the United States because you're only staying in the Detroit airport for a few hours. But if you need to go see your sick father, we try to be very, very considerate for humanitarian reasons, but you still need to demonstrate your family, social, and economic ties outside the United States. Have a clear plan for where you're going, how long you're staying, how long you're taking off from work, who's going to take care of everything. So I'm very sorry that your father is sick, but a C1 visa is an encouraging sign. You've already been issued a U.S. visa in the past, but it's not a guarantee that you'll get a tourist visa. All right, so we have about 5 more minutes, so we are going to try to wrap up. We're going to take one more question from online, but we also wanted to talk a little bit about our hometowns. I'm from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, where the shirt is from. It's the home of the Philadelphia Phillies, best baseball team in America, in my opinion. But basically, the U.S. Embassy has been promoting tourism in the United States. The President Barack Obama has launched this initiative, a tourism initiative to the United States, and we have this wonderful website called Discover America. www.discoveramerica.com. You can go on it and you can find out, learn lots of destinations that you can go to in the United States, different states, things to do there. We also are promoting different destinations in the United States on our blog, the Dissatisfied Voyager blog, where we've had different consular officers talk about their hometowns and things to do. So if you go on the Dissatisfied Voyager blog at blogs.usembassy.gov/Philippines, you'll be able to see a post from me, actually, where I talk about Philadelphia and the things that I would recommend people do. Philadelphia, to me, I grew up there. It's one of my favorite places in the world. It's the birthplace of America, and it's where the Declaration of Independence was signed. They have cheesesteaks, which are really, really delicious. And so I encourage you all to visit. It's much better than Michigan.
Is there any place to get cheesesteaks in the Philippines?
There is. There's a really good cheesesteak shop. It's called the Cheesesteak Shop, actually, and they import their rolls from Philadelphia.
Wow. Yeah. So I'm from Michigan, and something interesting about Michigan is that it's shaped like a mitten. So it's really easy when people ask you where you're from to show them right here on your hand. So my school, Michigan State University, my alma mater, is actually very close to the capital called Lansing, which is sort of right in the middle of the palm. But where I was born was from a city that most people know about in Michigan, which is called Detroit, and that's located a little bit down here, not far from Lansing. Michigan is surrounded by the 5 Great Lakes, and how you remember them is they're called homes: Huron, Ontario, Michigan, Erie, and Superior. And they're 5 really gigantic freshwater lakes. So if you are planning to travel to the Midwest in the summer, Michigan's a great destination because you can spend a lot of time on the beach.
Thanks. I didn't know so much about Michigan. Sounds like fun. I'll have to try it. Yeah. All right. So our last myth of the day is that it's hard to get a U.S. visa.
And that's not true. And I hope that we have cleared that up today, because most of the people who interview here at U.S. Embassy Manila are granted a visa. We have a lot of Filipinos who travel to the U.S. for a lot of different reasons. The Philippines has the largest number of seafarers who are granted visas who travel through U.S. waters and U.S. ports all the time. We have so many Filipino students who go to our universities in the U.S., whose companies have their headquarters in the U.S. but also have branches here in the Philippines. And of course, like everyone knows, everyone I talk to has a family member somewhere in the U.S. who they want to visit at some point in their lives. So again, I think some of the most important things we talked about today were to come prepared to your interview, to be able to describe your ties to the Philippines, to be honest and truthful about why you're going and how long you plan to stay and what you plan to do there, and just to be comfortable when you come in for your interview. All
right, and if you missed something earlier today, you can catch this entire video online on YouTube at youtube.com/USEmbassyManila.
And don't forget, there's lots of great information. You can follow us on our Twitter account at twitter.com/USEmbassyManila or facebook.com/Manila.USEmbassy.
Okay, and please also check out our Google Plus page, gplus.to/USEmbassyManila. And a lot of our concerns, a lot of the questions we talked about today are addressed on our visa blog, Dissatisfied Voyager. You can find it at blogs.usembassy.gov/Philippines.
And again, if you have something very specific, like we mentioned, we can't talk about individual cases, but if you have a question about your own case that's maybe pending here with us, you can always email NIV questions, non-immigrant questions, to consmanilaniv@state.gov, or immigrant questions to ivmanila-replies@state.gov.
Thank you for joining us today. We hope we've answered a lot of your questions about the visa process.
And hope you join us next month.